Part 9. Being a bug in a survival game. Author, Kuanke. Chapter 83. Sutingyu was confused by the message from Fatty, and quickly replied, "What happened?" "Fatty, boss, didn't you notice that Brother Chin didn't reply to messages in the group for 3 days? I had a private chat with Brother Chin today, but there has been no reply yet." Sutingyu, maybe he has something to be busy with. Sutingyu thought that she hadn't seen any news from Chin Chi for 7 days. Isn't this normal? Fatty, no, if something really happens, tell us that we still have some time. We had a good chat 3 days ago. After Fatty's analysis, Sutingyu also felt that something was wrong. In the game, Chin Chi is a level 6 player. The two of them have cleared 2 rounds of dungeons together. Chin Chi has strong abilities, rich game experience, calm personality, and reliable behavior, which also makes Sutingyu subconsciously ignore Chin Chi's situation in the real world. Sutingyu, fat man, entering the game will repair the player's defects. What are yours? Fatty, I am obese. I am fatter in reality than in the game. Boss, why do you suddenly ask this? Sutingyu, oh, I'm just curious about what Chin Chi's flaw is. Fatty, my opponent, boss, if you don't tell me, I really forgot about this, but no matter how you look at it, Brother Chin doesn't seem to have a flaw in turn. The game will fix the defects, which means that Brother Chin has a big problem. Sutingyu couldn't help being surprised when she saw Fatty's analysis being reasonable and well-founded. Fatty, your analysis is pretty good. Fatty, thank you for exaggerating, and making a silly smile. JPG. Fatty, boss, I heard something about players in the past 2 days. The fat man posted a long paragraph, and Sutingyu read it word by word, his expression slowly becoming serious. Parallel Paradise has been around for more than 2 months. Some players have privately established various alliances, and there are also many small groups. At first, they just wanted to protect themselves and pass the level together in the dungeon. But slowly, some notorious grey organizations emerged. Among them was a player organization called Undead Vultures, which specifically targeted some lone players or small vulnerable groups. In the game, Vulture members pretend to approach passerby players, deceive their trust, and obtain the real identity of passerby players. Then they find the player in reality, and force the player to engage in unpaid trading games through intimidation at the door, threats from relatives, etc. Coins and game props are, to put it bluntly, an open grab. Fatty, boss, Brother Chin has played so many rounds of dungeons, and there is a high possibility of encountering grey organizations if he is really targeted. Sutingyu pondered for a moment and did not rule out this possibility. However, Chin Chi's character was not that easy to get close to. The fastest way to generate trust in the game was to save lives, and Chin Chi was very capable and could not be easily trusted at all. No need for favors from others. Sutingyu was more concerned about another issue than this. A drunk person will never admit that he is drunk, but a fool with a sick mind will admit that he is a fool. In the first dungeon, Chin Chi said that he was just mentally ill and refused to admit that he was a fool. After coming into contact with the 2 rounds of dungeons, Sutingyu also realized that there was something wrong with Chin Chi's brain. Could Chin Chi's flaw be related to his brain? There is an upper limit for repairing defects in the game. It seems that Chin Chi has exceeded the repair limit and has not been completely repaired. So in reality, Chin Chi is not really a fool with a serious brain disease, right? Will he be bullied? Sutingyu chatted with Fatty for a long time, conducting various analyses and brainstorming. Rangoose. Useless. Chin Chi didn't reply to the message, and they didn't know Chin Chi's true identity and address in the real world, so they couldn't find anyone. Until the 26th, Chin Chi had no reply. Being a bug in a survival game. Author, Kuanke. Chapter 84. After the light and darkness disappeared like a wave, Sutingyu was a little surprised by the gradually clear environment in front of him. She was currently sitting in an iron cage with her knees clasped. There were dark red blood stains on the iron bars, and a disgusting stench filled the small space. Sutingyu felt a little heavy on her neck. When she lowered her head, she saw that she was wearing a strange hollow cylindrical iron ring with the number 044 on it. This thing, why does it feel a bit like the dog pen worn by Urha in her family? Sutingyu looked outside the iron cage. It was in a dark and silent old warehouse. Many iron cages were placed on the ground. People were sitting in them, both men and women. They were covered with sack-like clothes. The old and rough linen clothes that can no longer be called clothing, the hands, feet, and face are all dirty, as if covered with a thick layer of mud. They all hug their knees and hang their heads, motionless, like lifeless puppets. However, among those people, there were a dozen or so people who were visibly clean and tidy. Some of them were also looking at their surroundings, and some even took the opportunity to wipe themselves dirty. Sutingyu looked back and forth several times. His field of vision was limited and he couldn't see Qin-Chi and Fatty, so he looked away. These people with strange behaviors should be players mixed with NPCs. There was a lock on the iron cage. Sutingyu glanced at it, then landed on the iron railing. He stretched out his white and tender palms and gestured, feeling that he could break it off and get out. However, Sutingyu didn't take action. With so many people watching, she was determined not to destroy the little fairy's character. Unable to go out, Sutingyu could only check the copy information on the panel. Copy, Trapped Beast. Background, when night falls, on the 1st of every month, the crazy and bloody underground Colosseum opens on time at 7 o'clock in the evening. 100 slaves will be sent to the fighting stage to fight with 100 beasts for the nobles to watch. It is said that the slave who survives to the end will be granted freedom, escape from slavery, become a commoner, and even gain the respect of the nobles. Number of players, 20. Main mission, escape from the underground Colosseum within 7 days. Difficulty, 4 stars. Duration, 7 days. Pass-through rewards, after clearing the level, you can get a certain amount of game currency, and have a probability of getting game props and lottery opportunities. Penalty for failure, 500 game coins deducted. This time it was a 4-star dungeon, a transitional dungeon. It was no longer a low-star dungeon, so there were no game prompts. The main mission is for players to escape from the underground Colosseum within 7 days. It should be a copy with escape attributes. After Sutingyu read it, she felt that there was something special about this dungeon world. There were actually nobles, commoners, and slaves. It was a bit similar to the medieval West in the real world. So the people in cages here, including herself, were probably they are the 100 slaves who are about to be sent to the fighting platform to fight with wild beasts. There was no floor in the warehouse, only damp mud. Sutingyu also wiped mud on his little face a few times, and then made his clean clothes a little dirty. The difficulty of the 4-star dungeon is neither higher nor lower, but the NPCs in the dungeon seem to be more intelligent. Except for panels, props, and certain key shielding words, if the player's behavior is too weird, it will easily arouse the suspicion of the NPC. Because when players enter the dungeon, they take on the identity of a certain NPC and do not appear out of thin air. After a while, the door of the warehouse opened from the outside, and 8 fierce-looking men walked in, wearing uniforms and cylindrical hats with the word prison on them. A man swung his whip and slapped it on the nearest iron cage. The sound was like thunder, making the slaves inside tremble in fear. The remaining men, holding a bunch of keys in their hands, scattered to unlock the iron cage. Below is the list of thanks, in no particular order, OK. 5.24-6.21 Reward List, Thank you bosses. Yan Yan, Huan, Rabbit, Shui. The author is a bit stupid, I can't find the first 2 characters, so I can only compare them. Work hard to spend money. Yulan Swayan, Kyle, Xiao, Ruoshui Momo, and other small characters queued. 5.24-6.21 monthly ticket thank you list. There are monthly tickets before they are put on the shelves. Chicken jelly. Cute little things related to clouds, hibiscus children, yin yan, 2, crispy omega candy, special grade non-protective animals, ninquie not sentimental, etc. There are too many cuties who vote for recommendations every day and leave messages from time to time. The number of words is limited, so I won't thank you one by one. But every time you vote and every message you leave, Quibeo has read it carefully. Crabs, you guys. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Being a bug in a survival game. Author, Kuanke. Chapter 85. Come out. Come out faster. The men's rough and savage voices came one after another. If the slave in the iron cage slowed down a little, he would receive a punch or kick. The slave who was beaten looked frightened, without any anger or resistance at all, and rolled out of the cage. This is a 4-star dungeon, and there are generally no new players. The players among the NPCs at this time have all played several rounds of the game. Seeing this situation, no one is stupid enough to jump out and make a fuss. Sutingyu trotted out as soon as the iron cage was opened, without being hit by the man who opened the lock. The man who unlocked the door was stunned for a moment, and then turned around. The frail girl had already slipped into the crowd and was nowhere to be seen. Sutingyu moved among the crowd and finally saw the fat man's very conspicuous figure. Fat man Sutingyu moved over. When the fat man heard the familiar voice, he turned around and immediately moved over to join them with a smile on his face. Boss. I have finally met you. Where's Qin-Chi? Sutingyu turned around and looked around, but her impressive height of 1.56 meters only allowed her to see a handful of people around her. I didn't see Brother Qin. The fat man was a head and a half taller than Sutingyu, and he couldn't find any figure belonging to Qin-Chi. Fat man, please count the number of slaves. Sutingyu and Fatty moved to an inconspicuous corner and murmured in a low voice. Okay, boss. The fat man was counting people, while Sutingyu continued to look for where Qin-Chi was. When all the slaves came out, Sutingyu didn't see Qin-Chi. After the fat man finished counting, he said to Sutingyu, Boss, including us, there are only 99 slaves, and one is missing. Sutingyu frowned. Could the younger one be Qin-Chi? Or is Qin-Chi not a slave in this dungeon? Big brother, what should we do now? The fat man scratched his head and asked. Before Sutingyu could speak, the man holding the whip spoke coldly again. Line up in a line and follow them one by one. The chaotic group of slaves gradually formed a line under the threat of whips and fists. Here, let's get in line first, Sutingyu said, and pulled the fat man to the back of the queue. Although the 99 slave teams were loose, no one dared to make any noise. Sutingyu noticed that each slave wore the same collar around his neck, marked with different numbers. In addition, there are no handcuffs or shackles on the slaves who leave the iron cage. Although the clothes on their bodies are a bit crude, their bodies are relatively strong and powerful. Exiting the warehouse is a long, fully enclosed corridor, with an incandescent lamp installed every 3 meters overhead for lighting. After walking for about 10 minutes, we came to an elevator door. The elevator could carry up to 36 people at a time. Sutingyu and the other slaves were transported to the 10th underground floor in 3 batches. After exiting the elevator door, there is a huge underground prison. The environment is dark and humid. Black-skinned rats can be seen everywhere, crawling in every corner, making squeaking sounds. There is a layer of blood mixed with blood on the stone floor. There was thick dirt, and the turbid and dull air still had a faint sour smell of the cycle of grains. Several women among the players looked very ugly when they saw such a harsh environment here. The NPC slave, on the other hand, had a numb face and even took the initiative to get into the cell with the iron door open. Most of the people who didn't move were players. The environment here was dirty and messy, and it was unbearable for normal people. Sutinyu and Fatty found a relatively clean place and simply spread a layer of hay from the cell. As soon as they sat down, the closed elevator door opened again. The two men who originally unlocked the slaves, one on the left and the other on the right, dragged a man wearing leg irons, handcuffs, and collars in, and then threw them on the ground. Being a bug in a survival game. Author, Kuanke. Chapter 86. The man had large and small wounds on his body, and bright red blood seeped out from the wounds, staining his outer clothes red. He lay on the ground, not knowing whether he was alive or dead. The man holding the whip saw that all the slaves' attention was attracted. He sneered and stepped on the whip wound on the man's back. 200 whips, this is the consequence of trying to escape. All the slaves looked numb and coward, but Sutinyu's face slowly turned cold. The fat man secretly poked Sutinyu and lowered his voice, "Boss, it seems to be Brother Chin." I know. Sutinyu glanced at the man holding the whip coldly, and his voice was surprisingly calm. The last slave is really Chin Chi. It's just that Chin Chi's status as a copy is a bit unlucky, and he turns out to be a runaway slave. Other players also noticed something strange. Chin Chi's clothes were different from those of the NPC slaves. It was not difficult to guess the player's identity. It doesn't matter to them, other players just sigh in their hearts, this player is really unlucky. After the whip man finished beating the slaves, he said to the prison worker guarding the cell next to him, "Take off the handcuffs and leg irons, and give him some medicine. If this slave wants to die, he can't die here." "Yes." After the whip man left, one prison worker took off the handcuffs and leg irons, and another prison worker brought a simple small medicine box, threw it on the ground, and ignored it. After several prison workers locked the large iron door on the outermost layer of the prison, they took the elevator and left. The people on the ground seemed to have just regained their composure and slowly got up little by little. At this time, without the supervision of the prison workers, the slaves ran out frantically, trying to snatch the medicine box on the ground. Unexpectedly, a weak-looking girl got the medicine box first and blocked it in front of the slaves. "Brother Chin, don't worry." The fat man carefully helped Chin Chi up. Chin Chi lowered his head and couldn't see clearly the expression on his face. His body was a little unsteady and he could only rely on the fat man's hands to support him. Sutinyu glanced at Chin Chi's situation, "Fat man, help the good guy." After saying that, Sutinyu turned to look at the slaves and gestured to the medicine box in his hand, "This belongs to my friend. Hurry up and hand it over. He is a half-dead person, so there is no need to waste good medicine." The slaves who cowered in front of the prison workers looked like enraged, demented beasts, glaring at Sutinyu with a fierce look in their eyes. Other players looked at it coldly from the outside, did not get involved, and could not help. The slaves swarmed up and tried to snatch the medicine box from Sutinyu's hand. "Hey!" Sutinyu sighed softly, holding the iron-covered medicine box in his hand, and smashed the face of the slave who rushed over first. Boom! A figure was thrown out, overwhelming several slaves who wanted to rush up behind him. Sutinyu shook his other free hand in vain, trying to take out the stone tablet from the inventory, but then the panel suddenly jumped out. Notice. The player Angel Su carries a confinement device, the inventory will be temporarily closed, and the player will not be able to use game props. Sutinyu was stunned for a second by the panel that suddenly popped up, and then was approached by several slaves. Regardless of the abnormality on the panel, Sutinyu picked up the iron medicine box and smashed it. Bang bang bang. It couldn't be hit, so Sutinyu kicked him away. 80 slaves surrounded a frail girl, but they didn't even touch a hair of her. This scene directly confused the other players who were watching the show. After a while, a group of slaves fell to the ground with bruises on their noses and swollen faces, screaming in pain. Sutingyu handed the medicine box to the fat man first, and then walked over. When he saw a slave whose face seemed to be still unconvinced, he continued to make up for it while saying fiercely, "Are you convinced? What are you calling it? Still like this, are you energetic?" After a while, there were no more cries of pain in the prison. Being a bug in a survival game. Author, Kuan-Kei. Chapter 87. After seeing that no slave was unconvinced, Sutingyu kicked the nearest slave out of habit, and then walked towards Fatty and Qin-Chi. The players on the periphery subconsciously moved away to make way for Sutingyu. The fat man was trying to stop the bleeding on Qin-Chi's arm. There were very few medicines in the medicine box. There were only basic hemostatic medicines and bandages to cover the wounds, not even disinfectant. A clever woman can't make a meal without rice, so the fat man can only stop Qin-Chi's bleeding first, and then bandage the wound. "How's it going?" Sutingyu came over and asked. Qin-Chi leaned against the wall and sat on the haymat laid out by the fat man. He lowered his head and closed his eyes. He was indifferent to the injury and allowed the fat man to deal with it. "Boss, this can't go on like this. There is no medicine for disinfection and fever. If Brother Qin gets infected or has a fever, it will be even more difficult." The fat man used the torn strips of clothes and folded them into several layers as towels. Wiping the sweat from Qin-Chi's forehead, he responded to Sutingyu. "The inventory cannot be opened, and the medical kit prepared inside cannot be used at this time." Sutingyu figured out the cause of the convulsion on the panel just now, and told the fat man the bad news. "Ah," the fat man was confused and quickly went to confirm, "Isn't it right? You can't use props in this round of dungeon? Then we have to go up and fight with the beast later." Sutingyu glanced at Fatty's body, and couldn't bear to tell the worse news. "Fatty, I'm afraid you didn't go up there to fight, but to deliver takeaways." "Ahem." Qin Kameng coughed, directly interrupting the two of them who wanted to continue discussing hand-to-hand combat and delivery food. "Qin-Chi," Sutingyu squatted down and looked at the person with big eyes without blinking. "How are you? Does the wound hurt?" Qin-Chi raised his head slightly, glanced at the two of them, and gradually frowned, as if he was confused. There was still a trace of strangeness and alienation in his eyes, without any words. Seeing this, Sutingyu and Fatty looked at each other, feeling that Qin-Chi was in a strange state, as if he didn't recognize them. Sutingyu moved over little by little, like a little duck taking small steps, staring at Qin-Chi with his round eyes, his eyes fierce. The fat man thought Sutingyu was angry, so he quickly spoke to ease the atmosphere. "Boss, Brother Qin's wound may be too painful and he can't open his mouth." Sutingyu ignored the fat man, looked at Qin-Chi and spoke clearly, word by word, "You are, stupid." Qin-Chi's cold expression finally changed. She lifted her lips lightly and retorted, "No." "Who are you?" "No." "You are," Sutingyu asked immediately before Qin-Chi could refute again, "Then do you still remember who I am? Who is the fat man?" Hearing this, Qin-Chi's expression froze slightly, with a trace of confusion in his eyes. He slowly lowered his head and returned to his original state of silence. The fat man, who was forced to act as a backdrop, silently lowered his presence and continued to treat Qin-Chi's wounds. Seeing Qin-Chi's state, Sutingyu didn't press any further, so she sat cross-legged next to him, supported her chin with her hands, blinked her big eyes, and stared at the person closely. The fat man opened the clothes on Qin-Chi's chest and was shocked to find that there was already a bandage inside, but now blood was oozing out. The fat man loosened the bandage little by little, looked at the wounds inside, and quickly said to Sutingyu, "Boss, why is Brother Qin so scratched by a sharp weapon?" "A sharp weapon?" Sutingyu looked at the wound. It looked like it was scratched by some kind of knife. "Are you sure it's a sharp weapon? Didn't the whip man say 200 lashes?" "I'm sure, it looks like there are several kinds of wounds. The whip wounds are only on the back and arms, and on these legs, the fat man rolled up Chin-Chi's trousers. The more he looked at it, the more shocked he became. There was no wound anywhere on his body. At this time, there was a commotion in the player group, and some players had noticed that the game props could no longer be used. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Being a bug in a survival game. Author, Kuan-Ke. Chapter 88. Sutingyu ignored the chaotic players and directly captured a male slave. Don't hit me, don't hit me. The male slave held his head in his hands, cowering. If you answer honestly, I won't beat you, Sutingyu said with a kind angelic smile on his face. Do the prisoners here use sharp weapons such as knives to punish escaped slaves? No. I've never heard of using knives. The male slave huddled up and replied tremblingly, before the performance begins, the kind nobles do not allow any accidents, so the prison workers will only use whips. Promote us. Sutingyu narrowed his eyes slightly. You lied. Looking for a beating as he said that, he raised one hand, as if to strike. I didn't lie to you. I really didn't lie to you. The male slave held his head in fear and kept moving away from Sutingyu. Seeing that Sutingyu did not stop him, the male slave plucked up the courage and fled the place. Sutingyu turned around, stared at Chin-Chi for a few seconds, and said, Who did this to you in the real world? I haven't responded to messages for 7 days and I'm being bullied in the real world. Don't you know to tell us? After all, we are friends who have cleared the dungeon together. It's not the wounds you get when you enter the dungeon, it's the wounds you get in the real world. Chin-Chi's ability to repair defects should have reached its upper limit, so the injuries on his body have been brought over, and his brain seems to be even worse. The game will automatically identify the most serious defects in the player that hinder the completion of the copy, and then repair them. Looking at Chin-Chi's situation, the game should transfer part of the repair power originally used to repair the brain to the new trauma. In reality, how serious the trauma on Chin-Chi's body would be before the game would give up on repairing the brain defect. Chin-Chi slowly raised his head, stared at the girl for a few seconds, then pursed his lips. Sutingyu blinked his eyes, his expression softened, and he leaned closer and asked, Do you recognize me? Chin-Chi tilted his head slightly, glanced at the fat man again, paused for a few seconds, and then said hesitantly, The fat man is, fat man. The fat man was stunned for a moment, then he realized what he was doing and nodded repeatedly, Brother Chin, I am Fatty, you finally remembered. Chin-Chi blinked his eyes lightly, like two fragile butterflies fluttering their wings. He lowered his head and glanced at the injuries on his body, then slowly frowned and said in a calm tone, It hurts. Hearing this, Sutingyu and Fatty were both at a loss. Chin-Chi shouted that it hurt. He actually cried out in pain. The fat man could only hurry up and continue to treat the wound, but there was no painkiller. While bandaging it lightly, he complained, Why don't we even have painkillers, and the inventory can't be opened? Where can I go, try to find? Sutingyu picked up the cloth and wiped the new beads of sweat on Chin-Chi's forehead. It doesn't hurt. It's all an illusion. It doesn't hurt. After saying one word, Chin-Chi pursed her lips, lowered her head, and stared at the wounds on her body quietly with a cold expression. She did not cry out about pain, but her face was still pale. On the other side, the players finally realized the difficulty of this round of dungeons. Some players who had relied on good life-saving game props were panicked. This is the Colosseum. Without the game props, they all have to fight the beasts hand to hand. Sutingyu and the other three, who were the only ones present with a medicine box, once again became the focus. A male player wearing glasses came over, Excuse me, the medicine's in this medicine box. Get out, Sotinyu said coldly, while gently wiping cheese forehead. The male player was stunned by the yelling, and when he realized what he was doing, his expression turned ugly. Being a bug in a survival game. Author, Kuanke. Chapter 89. In fact, the fat man was also confused. Both Sotinyu and Sotinyu have gone through a dungeon, but he has never seen the former impatient. The fat man didn't dare to say anything, didn't dare to move, and continued to treat the wound. The bespectacled man raised his hand and pushed down the glasses on the bridge of his nose, with a righteous look that was all for everyone's benefit. Now that everyone's inventory cannot be opened, the only medicine box should be taken out and distributed collectively. These words resonated with all the players, and some players couldn't help but say, "That's right, we can't let him use it all by himself. What if one of us is injured and there is no medicine? He looks like he's almost dead. It's a waste of medicine. He might as well leave it to us." The scene where Sotinyu beat up 80 slaves by himself was a bit unbelievable, but some attentive players discovered that Sotinyu faced off against 80 slaves by himself, and the fight happened to be in the narrow corridor between the cages on both sides. In each wave of slaves group attacks, at most 5 or 6 people can approach Sotinyu at the same time. Sotinyu will deal with each attack. As long as he has sufficient physical strength, he will seize the time and finish off the 5 or 6 slaves in front first. Let's deal with the next wave. So from beginning to end, Sotinyu could only beat 6 at most, not 80. The situation is different now. Sotinyu was in a spacious cage, and 17 players could swarm him almost at the same time. Moreover, Sotinyu had just finished a fight and his energy was almost gone, if not exhausted. None of the players who were able to match the 4-star dungeon were truly stupid. They all realized that now was the most appropriate time to force Sotinyu to hand over the medicine box. As for the remaining mediocre fat man, a seriously injured patient who is dying, no player will feel threatened at all. Sotinyu stood up slowly and glanced at the players calmly. The condemnation of the players was gradually silenced. They all watched Sotinyu's every move as if they were facing a formidable enemy, for fear that she would go berserk again. Angel Su, think about it carefully. We are all players, and we are all trying to pass the level smoothly. It's not worth it to break up the relationship because of a mere medicine box relying on the support of all the players. The man with glasses was still trying to persuade Sotinyu had a good plan of convincing people with reason. The man with glasses deliberately came within 2 meters of Sotinyu and knew the latter's game nickname. He said it in public so that all the players could hear it. Knowing a player's game nickname gives you too much room for manipulation, such as issuing a kill order. Most players are driven by profit to crazily target a player in the dungeon, causing the latter to fail to pass the level again and again, and in the end they can only die. Sotinyu didn't seem to hear at all. He moved his fingers with both hands, and the 5 slender white fingers of his right hand gently grasped an iron railing next to him. The innocent and harmless face of the girl suddenly smiled softly at the players. Immediately, his right hand exerted force. A twist. Crack. As all the players watched helplessly, the iron fence was bent directly by the girl. Hiss. I don't know who took a breath of cold air, and all the players looked at Sotinyu, as if they were looking at a strange Lolita, showing deep fear and fear. Sotinyu let go of his right hand. The palm of his hand was only slightly red, but there was nothing wrong with it. She clapped her little hands, looked at the players with a smile on her face, and said in a very friendly manner, "Whoever has a broken hand or leg, I have some medical skills, and I can break the bone for him. No money is charged. This is a tough one. Not to be messed with." This idea came to the minds of all the players almost at the same time, and they no longer had the arrogance that they had at the beginning to bully the few. Who knows how many hard bones they have in their bodies, enough to break this strange girl's bones. Being a bug in a survival game. Author, Kuanke. Chapter 90. Seeing that all the players had honestly shut their mouths and stopped looking for trouble, the fat man looked at Sotinyu with admiration like the endless stream of a river. The boss is indeed a boss, he convinces people with his reason, he's awesome. Because the hemostatic medicine and bandages were not enough, Fatty could only treat some of Chin-Chi's more serious wounds first, and put the remaining hemostatic medicine and bandages back into the medicine box. The fat man handed the medicine box to Sotinyu. This was the safest thing to do, as he wouldn't worry about anyone caring about it. Sotinyu took a look at Chin-Chi's current condition, and found that he had fallen asleep. The fat man explained, "Brother Chin is a little weak and has lost too much blood. It's best to let him sleep for a while first." Yes, Sotinyu responded casually, then turned around and went back to the slave pile to catch another slave. Coincidentally, it was the same cowardly male slave just now. The male slave sat on the ground, with tears in his eyes and a look of despair on his face. "Please let me go." Sotinyu still had a smile on his face. "My handsome brother, I just want to ask you a few more questions." "Don't get too excited." The male slave's small body trembled twice in an instant, and he looked at Sotinyu, who looked harmless, with suspicion. You say it?" Sotinyu squatted in front of the male slave, holding his chin with his hands, with an innocent look on his face. "Brother, my two brothers and I came to the underground Colosseum for the first time. We are not very clear about the situation here. Can you tell us?" "What? Like, what are we going to do?" The male slave moved half back and then said in confusion, "You don't know, how did we get in? Later we will all go on stage to perform for the nobles, and the one who performs best can leave. Slave status, if you are lucky, you can be chosen by a certain nobleman." At the end of the sentence, the male slave's eyes clearly showed yearning. "Performance? What kind of show are you performing? Are you going to play with wild beasts on stage? Will the noble gentleman play with us?" Sotinyu asked curiously, with a hint of excitement in his tone. "How could the nobleman come down to be with us? You are overthinking it. We are only worthy of performing on the same stage as the pets kept in captivity by the noblemen." As he said this, the male slave's face did not look forced at all, but was filled with a certain emotion. A kind of crazy pride, as if this is a great gift. Sotinyu raised his eyebrows slightly. "Pets must mean beasts." "Oh, there's more, Sotinyu urged. "The pets raised by noble gentlemen are a bit vicious. During the monthly performances, many unlucky ones are bitten to death. The pets of noble gentlemen are usually kept in the underground Colosseum and taken care of by Captain Chris. The kind noble gentlemen have given us a chance to escape from slavery. As long as we can persist to the end and gain the appreciation of the noble gentlemen, I can escape from slavery and become a free commoner with my own land and slaves. You can marry a beautiful and virtuous wife, and have 2 considerate concubines. The male slave has fallen deeply into a beautiful fantasy. The hot desire that suppresses his heart is like a hallucinogenic poison, dangerous but tempting." Sotinyu blinked his big eyes and turned away, no longer caring about the male slave who was still dreaming. The slaves in this copy feel very servile. They just deliver food to the beasts, and they twist and beautify it into a performance together. Sotinyu complained softly to the fat man. The fat man laughed dryly. "Boss, do you think it would be scarier if we played together?" Hearing this, Sotinyu's eyes widened and he opened his eyes to tell lies. "Why are we playing together? Did I say that? I never said that." The fat man was silent. At this time, the elevator door suddenly opened and 4 prison workers walked out of the elevator. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Being a Bug in a Survival Game. Author, Kuanke. Chapter 91. A prison worker glanced at the slaves in the cage with disgust. number 001 to 050, line up in order. After saying that, the slaves whose numbers were in the range of 001-050 came out and lined up. Sutinyu looked at the numbers of Fatty and Chinchi. One was 072 and the other was 094. Her own number was 044, which was within the 50th. Without Sutinyu opening his mouth, the fat man said, "Big brother, go ahead. I will take good care of brother Chin." Yes, Sutinyu was in no hurry to go out. A prison worker was reading the number, but he hadn't thought of her yet. Sutinyu looked at the player group. There were a few players with higher numbers. They had dark faces when they were called and had to go out and line up. The fat man donated a whole coat, and Sutinyu tore off a long piece of rag and tied the brick-sized medical kit to his left thigh and fixed it in place. The medicine box cannot be left here. Neither Fatty nor Chin-Chi have the ability to hold it now. Some players who had not given up yet could only grit their teeth when they saw Sutinyu's actions, secretly cursing Sutinyu for his lack of martial ethics. 044. After hearing his number, Sutinyu walked out briskly. 050. After the prison worker read out the last number, he led the team into the elevator. In the elevator, Sutinyu paid careful attention to the number of floors. There were 11 floors in total. The cage where the slaves were located was on the 10th underground floor, and the warehouse at the beginning was on the 2nd underground floor. The elevator stopped at the 7th underground floor. After going out, there is still a long corridor, but as you keep walking along the road, you can gradually hear some sounds. The slaves were taken to a hidden stand with iron bars, but they could still see the outside environment clearly. A square coliseum opened up several underground floors. There were rows of auditoriums around it, which were already full of people. In the center of the coliseum, there is a round marble fighting platform with a large iron cage on it, which is empty. There is no doubt that that is the stage for human-animal performances. Outside the iron cage, stood a tall, thin man with a white face in a pink suit, holding a microphone and enlivening the atmosphere passionately. "Good evening, gentlemen and ladies. Welcome to the monthly beast fighting show. I am your favorite Smita. I declare that the first night of beast fighting has officially begun. Tonight, 50 pets carefully raised by Captain Chris and 50 performers will perform on stage. The protagonist of each performance is one animal and one person, and the performance time is 5 minutes. From the tall and thin host whose face seemed to have several layers of white powder on it, Sutinyu roughly understood the so-called performance rules. It means that 50 slaves have to fight against 50 beasts respectively, and only the slave who persists for 5 minutes without dying can end. And for slaves who cannot persist for 5 minutes, the ending may not be too happy. Let's look forward to seeing how many performers will be able to walk off the Colosseum tonight with their hands and feet intact. Which performer can lead the way with the most outstanding performance and get the Little Wish gift? The host warmed up for 5 minutes, and the first slave was about to go on stage to perform, and his performance partner was a ferocious big bad wolf. He persisted on the fighting stage for less than 3 minutes before the big bad wolf bit his neck. After struggling to no avail, he slowly died. The big bad wolf feasted on the stage and brutally devoured the flesh and blood of the dead slaves, while the audience cheered wildly in the auditorium, as if they were beating chicken blood, with extremely excited expressions. At the end of 5 minutes, a trainer took the big bad wolf away, and the second performance began. According to this time distribution, there can be 10 performances in 1 hour, and the slaves are arranged in ascending order of numbers. After a few performances, Sutinyu realized something was wrong. The beasts performing on stage are more ferocious than ordinary beasts kept in captivity, and they seem to be as intelligent as humans. No, it should be that they seem to be able to fully understand human language and behavior. Being a bug in a survival game. Author, Kuan-K. Chapter 92. At 7:55, the host announced a 10-minute intermission. The next performance will start at 8:05. Tigers, lions, cheetahs, crocodiles, wild boars, boa constrictors, none of the beasts performing were mild-tempered. They were all ferocious characters who were not easy to mess with. When they saw slaves, their eyes glowed green, as if they were being raped. It felt like he had been hungry for a long time, and he was too ruthless to pounce on the prey in front of him. Just persist for 5 minutes, but some slaves persisted. Whenever a slave ended up alive, there were boos and regrets in the audience. After the third intermission, the animal trainer actually brought a black blind man. The one who faced the black bear was a male player. The guy was so unlucky that he had no room for resistance and was torn in half. The scene was very bloody. Instead of being scared or intolerable, the audience went crazy and cheered wildly. Bite his head off. Pull out his eyes. Tear off his arms and legs. In the stands, there were still a dozen slaves who had not played and 2 other players, 1 male and 1 female. The slaves' faces were numb, and they seemed indifferent to the bloody scenes that they were also facing. Even when they saw the slaves on the stage being bitten to death by wild beasts, there was morbid joy in their eyes. If 1 more person dies, they will have 1 less competitor. As for the other male and female players, they were so frightened that they couldn't even stand still. When it was the female player's turn, she was beaten to death by a wild boar. Her body was bitten to pieces by the wild boar, and her flesh and blood were everywhere. Several more slaves were hummed one after another. They were dead and injured. Almost no slave could end up unscathed. 043, it's your turn. A prison worker came to call the next number. No. I don't want it. I don't want to go up. The male player is 043. Now he has lost his mind and is shouting. The 2 prison workers stepped forward indifferently and directly lifted up the male player. Looking at this posture, they would have to drag him onto the stage to perform the show. The male player struggled wildly and twisted his body. The 2 prison guards were careless for a moment and he broke free. After the male player got a brief freedom, he ran away. Catch him quickly. The 2 prison workers looked a little ugly and called more prison workers to chase the male player together. The remaining slaves of Sutinyu who had not yet performed on stage were also placed under strict supervision. Sutinyu was curious whether the male player could escape. Probably, it can't be. I don't have game props and I'm not familiar with the environment. It's strange that I can run away. 5 minutes passed, and the audience in the auditorium was already shouting for the next performance to start. The host had a friendly smile on his face, but his smile faded a bit when he saw that there was no other slave coming out of the passage. The whip man who was familiar to Sutinyu came out of another employee lane, ran to the host, and whispered something into his ear. Sutinyu clearly saw that the smile on the host's face gradually disappeared, and then he raised a strange smile again without knowing what he thought of. The host waved his hand, and the whip man walked off the fighting stage. Gentlemen and ladies, I'm sorry to have kept you waiting for so long. There was a performer who was not very obedient. After friendly guidance from our professional staff, the performer agreed to perform on stage and to apologize. He brought another one. An even more surprising performance. Let us welcome this performer with warm applause. Inexplicably, a little bloated. 100,000 have come, how can 1 million be far away?